Today we're going to talk about this guy, and that's the KSR with the cover open. I've just lifted the cover. And what we're going to talk about is the Stunt box, and we're going to make some changes in the Stunt box. Now what the Stunt box is a way to sort of program these things mechanically so that when certain characters or sequences of characters are received, different actions can be taken by the Teletype unit automatically. For example, one of them that this Teletype does that is not thrilling to me is that when two blank characters are received in a row, the keyboard locks. I don't know if it was obvious that that button jumped down. Let's get a closer look at that. This is the blank key right here. When this blank key is pressed twice in a row, this keyboard lock will go down. And after this keyboard lock goes down, none of the other keys operate. They have to be released with the keyboard unlock key before you can type. And this was apparently a standard thing to do. I don't know why. I don't like it. The other thing that's happening is that I believe I had mentioned in a previous video that I thought that the auto answer back mechanism was not automatically sending on a figure C character. And figure C was, as you can see possibly from this key on the keyboard, although there's some glare, figure C was it's labeled WRU, the Who Are You button, and it would cause a Teletype to automatically respond with the answer back mechanism that we looked before, and I'll link those videos below. That is not the case. In fact, this Teletype responds unreliably to the answer back mechanism, and I have some theories on why that is, but we'll look at that. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take the typing unit out of the Teletype and take a look at the function or the Stunt box on the back and its function bars and see if we can't disable these features that I'm not so keen on. So if you can pardon the handheld camera work and the noise, we'll get a closer look at this Stunt box here in a minute, but I wanted to show you how it's operating under operation and what's happening. And what you're going to see, I'm going to push the blank key twice in a row, and you're going to see that the first time I push the blank key, this lever right here will jump backward, and the second time I push the blank key, this lever and this lever together will both jump backwards towards the rear of the Teletype. We're looking from the rear of the Teletype toward the front right now. And that is how the Stunt box detects that an encoded sequence has occurred, is it allows these function levers to move. So I'm going to flip on the machine. It's probably going to get loud. We'll hit a couple of blanks and we'll see what happens. The machine is on. Here's the first blank. You saw that single lever moved, and now they'll both move when I hit the second blank. Now, removing the typing unit from the Teletype is, relatively speaking, a piece of cake. The whole unit actually will tip forward, which will give us access to much of what we want to look at, but I think for the purpose of filming it's going to be easier to get it out. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove a screw right here and a screw right here, and then equivalent screws on the other side of the machine, and the typing unit will simply lift out of the cabinet. There's one electrical connector that has to be removed, and it just comes free. And this is what the screws that hold the typing unit into the Teletype look like. They are pretty fancy schmancy. A lot of the screws and fasteners and such in this machine are clearly were machined to purpose. These are not just off-the-shelf parts. And one thing you'll find removing these rear screws is that a screwdriver with a bit of a long reach is a real bonus. So now that we've removed the screws, the typing unit just lifts right out of the machine. I've removed the paper, and here we're looking at the rear of the typing unit with the Stunt box. And this piece right here is the Stunt box. And as I said before, what it is a programmable interface, for a rather primitive definition of programmable, for making the Teletype do different things. For example, it controls several characters that do not advance the print head or do not cause the print hammer to strike and things like that. So the levers we're interested in are over here on this side. This lever right here is the one that triggers the Who Are You, the Answerback mechanism. And these two levers right here are the ones that trigger the locking on blank. Now, the Teletype manuals indicate that on some Teletypes there was a clip in here that allowed these to be disabled without making any changes or adjusting the machine. But this one does not appear to have that clip. And this right here, this Answerback, there wasn't any particular provision for preventing it from actuating. And because the Answerback mechanism is in the keyboard and not in the typing unit, what this actually does is it triggers an electrical contact here on this relay, which then comes out via this electrical connector over here and then goes down and electrically triggers the Answerback mechanism to send its ID when the appropriate character is received. Because the keyboard has no decoder for incoming signals, and the typing unit has no encoder for outgoing signals, so they have to cooperate in that way. I mentioned that I think that the Answerback mechanism function lever may be broken. And here you can hopefully see what I'm talking about. This is the Answerback mechanism function lever, and if you can see, it's square on the back right here, whereas all the other function levers have this little hook on the back. And part of what that causes is this bearing surface here, the little teed surface right there, is much smaller on this lever. And what happens is occasionally it gets pulled to the rear here. See if I can do it manually. Like that. And this lever is actually, it's probably not visible on camera, but it's actually locked behind the function bar underneath. And when it's in this position, it doesn't trigger. Nothing causes it to make the Answerback respond. So sometimes it trips and sometimes it doesn't. And what I want is for it to never trip. So what we're going to do is we're going to disable that. And then these levers over here are the lock on blank levers, and we're going to disable those as well. Alright, let's take a closer look at how this Stunt box mechanism operates. These two levers here are the lock on blank mechanism that locks on the second blank. It's kind of clever how this works. So what we have here is underneath, which is going to be hard to see from here, there is a function bar, and the function bar has teeth on the front that are encoded for a particular Baudot character. And when the Teletype is decoding that character, has decoded it to print it, that function bar is allowed to fall forward. When it falls forward, this piece right here that I can lift, the function Paul, is allowed to fall downward. There's a protrusion on the function bar that holds it up like this. When it falls downwards, it falls down behind the function bar. And we can look at this one that's broken here and see how that happens sort of artificially. And it falls down behind like this. And if you can see, if I can get enough light on it, if you can see there's a little hook that fell behind the function bar that ordinarily sits on top of the function bar like this. And so once it's fallen behind the function bar, then at the next operation, or at the completion of the decoding of the operation, that function bar returns to the rear. And when it returns to the rear, it then pulls the function Paul with it. When it pulls the function Paul with it, the function Paul activates this, which is the function lever. And the function lever, way down on the other end, does something. So in this case, we have a sort of a two-stage mechanism here. This function lever right here, what it does is when it's in the forward position like this, it blocks this function lever, this function bar, underneath the function Paul, from operating. And so this function bar will never fall forward until after this function bar has been activated on the previous character. When this function bar activates and then pushes this function pawl to the rear, it causes this function lever to be pulled to the rear where it latches. If you can see, this lever is farther to the rear than the levers on either side of it. When this lever is latched to the rear, it no longer blocks the function bar in the adjoining space. So the function bar in the adjoining space then on the next blank character allows its function pawl to fall. When it's pushed back to the rear, it pulls its function lever with it, and its function lever, we'll take a look on the bottom, activates a button, literally a button, on the keyboard mechanism that causes it to lock. So the other end of that function lever on the second blanking mechanism ultimately ends on this bar right here. And when that function mechanism is triggered, let me see if I can do this without getting in the light. When that function mechanism is triggered, that bar moves. And when that bar moves, as I said, it depresses a button in the keyboard, in the base underneath this, that causes the keyboard to lock. So what we have to do in order to prevent this mechanism from locking the keyboard is either prevent this first blank from ever tripping or prevent this second blank from ever tripping. And what we're going to do is we're going to prevent this first blank from tripping. And as I mentioned, the way they trigger is that the function bar moves forward and allows this pawl to fall, and then when the function bar returns, it pushes the pawl to the rear. So in order to keep this pawl from tripping, what we can do is we can take a small piece of twine and we can simply tie it to this bar up here, or a piece of thread even, tie it to that bar up there so that it's lifted just a few thousandths of an inch up above the function bar underneath. Once it's lifted, it can't be triggered. So for completeness, the other part of this mechanism that matters is this, which is called the stripper bar. And if you see, the stripper bar right now is behind the function bars, and they really can't move to the rear. The pawls can't move to the rear. They get blocked. So during operation, in the correct part of the operating cycle, the stripper bar moves down. When it moves down, it allows whichever of these function pawls have been activated to move towards the rear of the machine. After they've done their job and return forward, they will be hung up on the back of their corresponding function bar, the same as this one does because it's broken. Then the stripper bar, which moved down out of the way to allow this to operate, will move up. When it moves up, it pushes up on the bottom of these function bars, or of the function pawls, unlatching them from the function bars and allowing them to return to their non-operating position. So I have to confess that the disposition of this guy right here, this is the function pawl for the Answerback mechanism that I believe is broken off. There's the broken face and there's the normal rear of another adjacent function pawl. I have to confess that I don't really understand what's going on here, because the way that's shorn, when it comes to the rear, it latches behind the function bar and is not pushed off by the stripper. And I don't understand why that causes the behavior that I'm seeing. But in any case, we're also going to take this lever and we're going to tie it up just a little bit to prevent it from actuating as well. I don't want to tie it up too far, because I think if it comes up too far, it actually trips a relay contact. So here's a diagram of the stunt box mechanism from a Teletype, really advertisement sort of paper that described how the stunt box mechanism could work for a business in their business operations and allow them to automate some things. And I don't remember where I got this document. Probably from Navy Radio, but I'm not sure. But it's a full color advertisement that goes through how the stunt box works and what it can do and such. And it also happens to have this diagram that shows how the individual actions in the stunt box are decoded. So for those who are good with mechanical diagrams, this may help you understand what's going on, particularly because it's so hard to see the internals of the mechanism when looking at the Teletype in action. So the first thing we're going to look at is the function bar. And the function bar, if you remember, is the piece that falls forward when a particular character is encoded or decoded by the teletype, and then allows the function pol to be engaged and move to the rearward at the end of that decode, which trips the function lever. So that sort of moves in that order as the mechanism operates. And the function bar has a series of tines here that, depending on the code bars in the teletype, fall either to a marking or a spacing position based on the code bars that they strike against. And as you can see, each one of these is forked and has two protrusions on it, which can fall forward when those protrusions are in front of a gap and are blocked when those protrusions are in front of a tine on the code bar. And one of these represents a mark and the other one represents a space. And if there are no tines in this position, then no matter what is encoded, no matter what bit is encoded for decode at that point, that function bar is not blocked at that bit. And if it has one of the tines, it's only unblocked on a mark, and if it has the other tine, it's only unblocked on a space. So this little guy right here, this tail on the end, is what actually actuates the function pol. And what happens is when this function bar falls forward, this little tail on the end normally rests here on the function pol. It falls into this gap right here as the function bar moves forward, or rather the function bar moves straight forward and the function pol falls down onto the function bar. Then the function bar, all of the function bars that are activated move to the rear, and if it has fallen into this gap, then this little protrusion pulls the function pol to the rear. When the function pol is pulled to the rear, it trips the function lever, which then somewhere down here on the bottom end does, something, whatever it is that it does. And you can see these two diagrams show that happening. This is a disengaged function bar. The function bar was blocked and could not move forward. And so the function pol rests on this little tail of the function bar right here, and the function lever just sort of hangs out in its neutral position. Well, if the function bar is allowed to fall forward, then the function pol falls down right here onto the tail of the function bar, and then when the function bar moves to the rear, this little blade right here pulls the function lever to the rear, moving the bottom of the function lever forward and doing whatever it is that that function lever does. Then when the whole mechanism is done and finished operating, this right here, this is they call it the stripper bale, or the stripper blade, I guess, moves upward, pushes the tail of the function pol upward, and allows the function bar to reset. Then the stripper blade moves back down, and the function pol falls back onto the top of the function bar, ready to decode the next character and determine if it should actuate. So for those who are comfortable with mechanical diagrams, hopefully that'll help you understand a little better what's going on inside the teletype. Alright, so here we are in the Stunt box, and I've got some just regular old sewing thread here. This is actually a cotton poly blend, and I hope the poly doesn't cause a problem with all the oil that's in this machine. I looked for a pure cotton thread and didn't immediately find one. But what we're going to do here, I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see. This lever right here, or this function pol right here, triggers the function lever that causes, that you can see there in the back, that causes this to lock on the second blank. So what we're going to do is we're going to tie a piece of thread around this and lift it just a bare fraction of an inch. Lift it just a tiny bit so that it can't fall onto its function bar by tying it to this support bar up here. So I'll go ahead and I'll cut off or break off a length of thread here, and we'll go ahead and we will wrap it around the function pol and then up around that upper piece. Which may be easier said than done with this camera in between me and what I'm working on. Alright, so see, we're wrapped around, if I can get my hand out of the way so you can get some light, we're wrapped around the function pawl, and we can lift it just a tiny bit. Take this thread and put it around, put one end of it around the back side of this support bar. And just tie it off. I'm going to have to move the camera out of the way to tie it off. I don't think you'll be able to see much anyway with my fat hands in the way. So I'm going to move the camera, I'm going to lift this, I'm going to tie it off, and we're going to put it back in and try it. These bars over here are the ones that have to do with the auto answer back mechanism, and I'm no longer completely clear exactly how it's triggered. So once we put this unit back in the Teletype, I'm going to try to trigger it by hand. I believe that will involve moving this function lever right here. This function pawl and the associated function lever right there. I'm going to try triggering it by hand, make sure I have the right lever, and then if I do, we will tie it up as well. So I'm going to go ahead and tie this off to lift that function pawl. I'm going to put the typing unit back in the machine, and I'll see you back over at the KSR. Alright, before I put the typing unit back in the machine, I wanted to show you real quickly, this is not something that you need to be afraid of, taking this typing unit out or replacing it. And the reason for that is that it's very well designed and it's pretty easy to get out and put back in. These little conical pegs here form locators for the typing unit itself. There are matching holes in the bottom of the typing unit. And there's a locator here on this side, and there's a locator just off frame here on the other side. So when you place the typing unit in, it simply sits down on this gear, this drive gear right here, and then this gear right here. And on these two locators, locates itself, squares itself up, and you just drop the screws in. So if you ever have reason to take your typing unit off of your Teletype because you want to get to the Stunt box, or because you want to clean it up or whatever, it's totally not something to be afraid of. It's easy to pull it out, it's easy to drop it back in. Alright, so here comes the moment of truth. Our keyboard is unlocked. We'll hit 2 blanks in a row and see what happens. Oh, beautiful. Notice that the keyboard lock key did not strike like it did before. Before, if I would receive a long sequence of blanks, this key right here would hammer up and down as each blank was received after the second. And note that it's doing nothing at all right there. So beautiful. The next thing we're going to do is I'm going to reach around to the back of the machine, and I'm going to try to trip the function lever that I believe activates the here is mechanism, and we'll see if I've identified the correct lever. I'm going to do that off camera because it's going to be a little bit tricky to manage the paper. I have to pull the paper forward and then try to trip that in the back, and I want to get the camera tripod out of the way. So I'm going to check that, and we'll be back in just a second. Well, as you can see by the KB8OJH here on the paper, my suspicion was correct. It is the last function lever on this end before the 2 levers that do the keyboard lock on blank that actually triggers the here is mechanism. There are 3 levers there side by side that are related to the here is mechanism, but the documentation that I've been able to find on that mechanism is in the wiring that goes to it, because remember, this is an electrical trigger, is not great, and 2 of those levers actually have contacts on the relay. What caused me to believe that it was the leftmost lever is that the leftmost lever is a normally open contact that closes when the function lever activates, and the rightmost lever, which also is on a contact on the relay, is a normally closed relay contact that opens when the function lever operates. And I knew that the here is mechanism in the unit is triggered by a closing contact. So that's why I believed that it would be that lever, and it was. So off camera again, I'm going to go in, I'm going to tie that lever up, and I think we're done here. So we've seen the Stunt box, and we've seen the function levers and the mechanisms and how they work. And we've managed to make the changes in this Stunt box to deactivate the functions that were giving me a little bit of trouble. So thanks a lot for watching. We'll see you in the next video.